We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin. 3 young singers who soared to the heights of show business on the current rock and roll craze were killed today in the crash of a light plane in an Iowa snow flurry. The singers were identified as Ritchie Valens, 17, Buddy Holly, 22, and J.P. Richardson, known professionally as the Big Bopper. The aircraft chartered from the Dwyer Flying Service crashed near Mason City. The 3 singers had appeared at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa last night and were on their way to Fargo, North Dakota. Their small chartered plane crashed in a lonely farmyard about 15 miles northwest of Mason City.
Hello, and welcome back to another vintage-inspired video. History seeking has brought us today to a very cold Clear Lake, Iowa, 1 week before the 66th anniversary of the day the music died. Right here in front of me is the Surf Ballroom, where on February 2nd, 1959, Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper played their final show. It said there was around 1,500 people in attendance that night, mostly teenagers looking to dance the night away to their favorite rock and roll stars. Just before midnight, the show ended. The 3 exhausted men loaded into the car the Surf's owner, Carol Anderson, and headed to the Mason City airport about 3 miles away from here. From there, they got onto an airplane to take them to their next destination. But sadly, minutes after takeoff, that airplane crashed into an open cornfield, killing everybody on board. For today's video, I'm going to take you inside the Surf Ballroom, see where they had their final show, as well as make our way out to that crash site and pay our respects. It was a 24-day tour through the Midwest during the winter called the Winter Dance Party, or to those who were on it, the Tour from Hell. It started January 23rd, 1959, and Holly was with different bandmates than his usual Crickets members due to ongoing managerial disputes. The other acts on the tour were Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, Frankie Sardo, and Dion and the Belmonts. The tour was not streamlined at all. It had them zigzagging across the Midwest during one of the coldest winters in decades on a bus that did not have proper heating. One night got as cold as negative 35 degrees. By the night of the Clear Lake show, the bus had broken down multiple times. Many of the members had gotten sick, and Carl Bunch, Holly's drummer, was out temporarily because he had gotten frostbite to his feet while on the bus. So before the show that night on February 2nd, Holly was over it. He wanted to get to their next destination as soon as possible, get some laundry done, get some rest. So he chartered a flight for himself and bandmates Tommy Alsop and Waylon Jennings to take them ahead to Fargo, North Dakota, which was right next door to where they were playing the next night in Moorhead, Wisconsin. The flight would have been 2 hours, the bus about 5.5 hours. However, fate had other plans for who was on board the plane that night, and we'll talk more about that once we go inside. We'll take a closer look at this. I think it's been here since 1988. It says, "In loving memory of rock and roll legends." And right there, memorial for the pilot, Roger Peterson. The above legends played their last concert at the Surf Ballroom, Clear Lake, Iowa, on February 2nd, 1959. Their earthly life tragically ended in a plane crash 5.2 miles northwest of the Mason City airport, February 3rd, 1959. Their music lives on. I have been into old Hollywood history, the films, fashions, and personalities of the era ever since I was a child, but I would say it was around high school I first heard of Buddy Holly and really got into him, and some of my earliest record purchases were his. So this is a place I have always wanted to visit, and knowing the 66th anniversary was coming up, I made somewhat of a last-minute decision to come out here and finally see it. And I wanted to come around the same time of the year that they were here to really get a feeling for the place. And I think I'm getting that because it is really quite cold. Not as cold as it was, though, when they were here, I'll say that. Every year, this time of year, they bring back the Winter Dance Party. And it's coming up in just a couple days here. Like to imagine this room full of 1950s teenagers dressed in their very best, cutting loose to Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens. It was probably quite the sight. I mentioned the plane was chartered for Holly and his bandmates, but that fate had other plans. 17-year-old Ritchie Valens won a coin toss against Tommy Alsop, who he was begging for his seat on the plane. I've read that Valens had a fear of flying, so these pleas seemed perhaps out of desperation to get away from the freezing bus. And it may be apocryphal, but it's said that after winning that coin toss, Valens remarked, "That's the first thing I've ever won in my life." That exchange is said to have happened near the entrance to the green room. Tommy Alsop had come in through the green room back door just to make sure they had retrieved everything before leaving, and was met by Ritchie Valens, who was standing in the main doorway. Who again asked him, "Can I have your seat on the plane?" And again, Tommy said no. So Ritchie introduced the idea of a coin toss, except it wasn't a quarter, it was a $50. And he said, "Heads I win, tails you win." And it was heads, so Ritchie got that seat on the plane. I also read, it was inside here, where Buddy Holly first informed his bandmates that they would be taking the plane that night, and also where the pretty famous exchange between Waylon Jennings and Buddy Holly took place. They would have come right up these steps, right here, out onto the stage, to what I can only imagine was a whole bunch of teenagers just going absolutely crazy. And can you just picture it? The final number had everyone on the tour up on this stage, the Big Bopper with his signature phone in his hand, completely rocking out, and Buddy Holly performing Brown-Eyed Handsome Man to a crowd that I'm sure was going crazy. It is blowing my mind to be standing right up here where all of that history that day took place. And I'm sure part of the emotion is also what happened right after that, knowing where the night was headed. But I am just always completely moved by being in these types of places. So, so glad I got to bring you all along with me. They would have then exited back into the screen room. Very small. Sure, it was quite cozy. So I mentioned about the exchange between Buddy Holly and Waylon Jennings. That took place in this room. The Big Bopper was coming down with a terrible flu, and so he approached Waylon Jennings and asked him for his seat on the plane. And Waylon said, "If it's all right with Buddy, it's all right with me." And so, just like that, the Big Bopper took Waylon Jennings' seat on that plane. And then later, Buddy, after the show, had told Waylon to go and get some hot dogs for them. And so he went and did that, and when he came back into this room, he found Buddy Holly sitting in a chair, leaning against the wall, laughing because he wasn't going to go on the plane with them. And then they had an exchange that went on to haunt Waylon Jennings for decades. Buddy playfully said, "I hope your old bus freezes up." And Waylon jokingly replied, "I hope your old plane crashes." And under 90 minutes later, just past 1 a.m. on February 3rd, 1959, the unthinkable did occur, and that plane did crash. And those words went on to haunt Jennings for decades. He said he felt responsible for the crash, and that precipitated bouts of substance abuse for much of his life. But he did come back here and perform, and that it was kind of a way for Waylon to battle those demons that were born on that very cold night here in Clear Lake, Iowa. A very nice gentleman that works here by the name of Wayne shared some fun facts with me. So the stage, you can see the tape right here. This entire portion over here was added when Alice Cooper performed here about 15 years ago. So this all to the left is the original stage from when Buddy Holly performed here. He also said these 4 arrows up here are all to represent the 4 men who died that night, including pilot Roger Peterson. And the circle that the arrows are going through is to represent eternal life. The tapestry is original from the 1940s. He also shared with me that right here in the middle of this brick wall is where Buddy Holly sat after the concert that night and signed autographs. I wonder where all those autographs are today. And he told me too that the furniture is all original from the 50s. He also pointed out in here some signatures that I wanted to make note of. So right here is Maria Elena Holly, that is Buddy Holly's wife. At the time of the crash, they'd only been married about 5 months. He said this wall happened after Buddy and everyone was here, so they did not themselves sign it at that time. Then we have Waylon Jennings over here, and down here, Don McLean with the opening words to The Day the Music Died. A long, long time ago. Behind this door, we also have the autograph of Tommy Alsop. There used to be a payphone that was right here. My friend Wayne that I met who told me about it. I knew about it, but it is currently out in the lobby, but this is where it originally stood and where Ritchie Valens called his half-brother Bob and made plans to meet him in New York. It's also where Buddy Holly called his wife Maria Elena and complained to her about the conditions of the tour and the low morale it was causing, and told her that he was going to make other arrangements for the next night's date. Though she said he never mentioned anything about the airplane. Wayne also told me these sinks are from the 1950s, and when Buddy was here, this one on the left was used as their clothes washing station because very famously they had issues with getting the clothes that they were wearing cleaned before the next night's tour, which caused some smelly issues and things on the bus. So he said they used this sink to wash their clothes. And then these pegs up here are meant to hang instruments from, but that night they were used to dry their clothes, and they would use radiators to get them to dry out before they had to leave. And right here, this door is the one that they exited out of on their way to the airport. And it is just incredibly crazy to me to be standing right here in the very spot that Buddy Holly did. Oh, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. I should also point out this very beautiful portrait of Ritchie Valens up here. Wayne said that's what started this trend of autographing the walls.
Hi, Buddy.
Hi, Ronnie. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Buddy, could you tell us some of the big records that you and your group have had?
Oh, well, we've had That'll Be the Day was our first one, and Peggy Sue followed it, and along with Oh Boy and Maybe Baby, and then Early in the Morning, and then our latest one, It's So Easy.
You've sold quite a bit. Do you know the total number of all your records, how much they've sold so far?
We don't have any idea, Ronnie, what's sold. We figure somewhere around 4 or 5 million, somewhere along there.
4 or 5 million. Tremendous volume of records.
Buddy Holly isn't just famous today because of the awful way he died and so young. He'd built a name for himself in music in his short lifetime, and he was a star at the time of his death in a short career, which he embarked on in 1950. 1952. By the time this show occurred here at the Surf Ballroom, he had already opened for Elvis multiple times, the first time being in February of 1955 in his hometown of Lubbock, Texas. He played the famed Apollo Theater, appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, American Bandstand with Dick Clark, and sold millions of records. He had songs on the Billboard charts, he toured internationally, and was an influential force and aided in the rise of rock and roll in the 1950s. I mentioned about his wife. He had just gotten married at the time of the crash, and he'd only been married for 5 months. He'd met his wife, Maria Elena Santiago, at a music publisher's office in New York. It's called Pierce Southern, and he moved fast. He asked her out for a date the first day they met, and he asked her to marry him on that first date. And they were married August 15th, just about 2 months after they first met. The Big Bopper, whose real name was J.P. Richardson, was a disc jockey, songwriter, singer, best known probably for his song Chantilly Lace. He took his stage name from a dance that college kids were doing called the bop. He's known for his contributions to the rock and roll genre, along with the humorous elements that he brought to his music. Hello, baby. It sounds just like him, right? At the time of the crash, he was married, had a daughter, and 2 months after the crash, his son was born. Valens had only just begun his music career and was the youngest of the 4 men who died that day. He started his career only 2 years before, in 1957. He's considered a pioneer of the rock and roll genre, probably best known for his 1958 hit La Bamba, which I'm very proud to say I learned all of the lyrics for recently, so I can sing that. Maybe I'll do a Patreon. Just kidding, but I can sing it. The first single he had was Come On, Let's Go, which was released in May of 1958. Then that was followed up with a double A-side with Donna, I love that song, written about his girlfriend, and La Bamba, which sold over 1 million copies. In that short time he had in his career, he toured, appeared on American Bandstand, again with Dick Clark, and also performed at the Apollo Theater. In his lifetime, Hawley released 3 full-length albums and numerous singles. He left behind dozens of unfinished recordings and other materials for future songs. His last recordings were made in his apartment in 1958, where he recorded 6 songs, and these were later overdubbed and included on records released posthumously, including Peggy Sue Got Married and Crying, Waiting, Hoping. Hawley had recorded so much in his short time that his label was able to release new albums and singles for the next 10 years following his death. I had read some fans even said that it felt like he wasn't even actually gone because they kept releasing new music for so long. Wayne also shared with me that these used to have a knob on them that you can call the server by or say that it was reserved, and then they had napkins on the other side of them. I had mentioned that payphone and how it used to be in the green room. Well, here is that exact phone. How cool is that? Right here, it says, this payphone was used by Buddy Holly to call his wife, Maria Elena, in New York, and by Ritchie Valens to call his manager, Bob Keane, in Los Angeles on the evening of February 2nd, 1959. And it's signed there by Maria Elena Holly. Beautiful signature. And I'd read that Ritchie Valens had called his half-brother Bob, and that's something you'll find if you do any research into something that has occurred 70 years ago. There's always little tiny fact differences from one story to the next. So who can say with 100% certainty who he called that night? But what we can say is Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly both use this phone. And I think that is just so neat. I had to just point out this coat check because I'm in Southern California, where it is usually not very cold. However, that has not stopped me from amassing quite the vintage coat collection. But the problem I found is when you go anywhere in San Diego, coat checks do not exist. And so I wanted to just show this one, especially because it has such a cute vintage look to it as well. I also wanted to point out some of the Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens art that is around the lobby. This is really cool. They have Ritchie Valens' signature, Buddy Holly's signature, and the Big Bopper. Oh, very cool. It says original signatures by those three men I just mentioned. And then it talks about the day the music died. Okay, there's some really great photos here. I'm gonna have to go get a closer look. Here are some shots from the Winter Dance Party. Buddy Holly right there. Tommy Alsop and Waylon Jennings on the left. It's Buddy Holly. Again, Waylon Jennings back on his left. Well, I guess his right, our left. And Tommy Alsop opposite that. Ritchie Valens, Waylon, and Tommy again. Frankie Sardo and Dion of Dion and the Belmonts. Let's go and see if that bar is still there. I wanted to just show these vintage photos. It's so cute. Something I will say about the Surf here, they have done a heck of a job preserving their history, honoring their history. You know how I said, let's go find the bar that looked like that photo? I think we found it. Wayne informed me that this is where that Frankie and Dion photo took place. I'm glad I asked because I could not tell if it was here or on the other side, but he said that where that open door is, the bar used to extend down. We have the original Mason City newspaper talking about the plane crash. Right here is the headset to the airplane. Wayne had told me that a local resident had gone out to the crash site and there was a security guard who was watching over it. And they let them take something from the wreckage and they took this headset, which is crazy today to think that they would let anyone take something from it. But they took it home and just kind of forgot about it. And around 1995, they brought it in and donated it to the Surf. This section has articles relating to the Big Bopper. That top one is a letter from the mortuary regarding J.P. Richardson's missing briefcase. We have received the body of Giles P. Richardson, along with his personal effects, which include his wallet, pocket items, and suitcase. His family and business associates here inform us that he was never without his briefcase, which contained all of his business papers. They also say that he should have had in the neighborhood of $1,500 with him. Any help or information afforded us in locating this item will certainly be appreciated. Location of the briefcase was unknown until returned to the family some 25 years later. And here is that briefcase. Looks like a journal here, maybe some lyrics. It says Sweet Lips at the top. This is his necktie and personal label. That label is sharp. This one here has some Buddy Holly related items. This is a letter from Buddy Holly's family. This was February 14th, 1959, and it looks like it was to Ritchie Valens' mother. Starts, Dear Mrs. Valens, I feel that I must write a few words to you. Although human words cannot console us at this time, only God can give consolation. I have never known before the suffering and grief which we now have at losing a loved one. But I can truly say, now that I know what you're going through also, our hearts are crushed by the tragedy, and only the thought that God wanted some more jewels in heaven can in a measure bring us consolation. Although at this time, I feel that I will never get over the loss of our baby boy. Really brings it home, I think, when you see such a gut-wrenching letter. At the core of it, this was a mother who lost her baby boy. This looks like a letter from Buddy, dear mother and daddy. We all decided to stay here in the hotel for a while, so you can write us here. Be sure to mail it airmail so it will get here before we leave if we come back right after the session. Everything is dandy here. Everyone says a big hello. I don't know anything for sure yet, except we are doing this one session. These are Buddy Holly personally owned cufflinks. I love those, the little starburst. Wow. This case for Ritchie Valens. Right here, this says, La Bamba, wrote for Ritchie by his aunt. Oh, how cute. She wrote out the lyrics. Bala bala la bamba, bala bala la bamba, se necesita uno poco de gracia. Remember how I said I could sing it, but that's all you're gonna get. I saw a photo that was in an article about a gentleman who was here at the dance that night, and they had him posing against one of these pillars. I'm not sure which one it was, but he just was speaking about how that night he was posted up against one of these, watching music history unfold before his eyes. This is the Mason City Airport where the plane flew out that night. The three men arrived shortly after midnight. They boarded at 12:40 a.m. and the plane took off just before 1 a.m. We're looking towards the runways. Those two signs in the distance point left for 12 through 18 and right for 30 to 36, I assume in reference to the runways. There's two runways, and they meet at an A point in the south, and that's the direction the plane took off from. I read in the crash report they took off from runway 17. From an overhead map view today, there is no 17 marked, but there is an 18, and that would be the one that is furthest from us. So maybe they changed it to 18, I'm not sure. But from everything I read, it does seem like it would have been the one that is furthest from our standing point. They would have taken off to the south, which is about in this direction. Gone up. They would have made a counterclockwise turn east, followed this path like this in the sky, till they would have been about northwest heading that direction. And that's where the crash site is. When the airport first opened in 1946, a remodeled farmhouse was used as the terminal. I'm guessing that's what was here when Buddy and the other men were here, because the next thing I saw was this terminal was built in 1966, and it's going to be torn down, as you can kind of tell, and a new one was built right next to it in 2024. I just wanted to say that I came out here last night when I got into Iowa. It was nighttime, so it was dark outside. I sat in the car, I listened to Buddy Holly and read the book, The Day the Music Died. But something that I noticed was just how dark it was out here. And this is 2025. So just imagine how dark it must have been the night they took off in 1959. When it comes to the crash, there is a lot of information out there. My goal was to pull from the most credible sources that I could. So everything I'm about to say next comes from the crash report and a book called The Day the Music Died. It was just after 12:40 a.m. on February 3rd, 1959. The snow had begun to lightly fall and the weather had started to deteriorate from just a few hours before. The three rock and roll stars had just loaded into a small 1947 Beechcraft Bonanza. The pilot taxied to runway 17, radioing to the weather briefers once more before taking off at 12:55 a.m. Mr. Dwyer, the owner of the aircraft and charter service, watched as the plane took off to the south, climbed to about 800 feet, made a counterclockwise turn, and headed northwest before witnessing the taillights make a gradual descent until they could no longer be seen. It was just after 1 a.m., and what Mr. Dwyer did not yet know was that the plane had crashed into a cleared-out cornfield some 6 miles away from the airport. On board were Buddy Holly, 22, Ritchie Valens, 17, J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper, 28, along with 21-year-old pilot Roger Peterson. At the time of the crash, pilot Peterson had around 400 to 700 flight hours. He was a licensed pilot, but he was not authorized to fly in weather, which was slowly worsening. He had passed his last written exam, but had failed the instrument flight check March of the previous year, and had only 8 or 52 hours of instrument time recorded, depending on the source. This meant he was only cleared to conduct flights under visual flight rules, meaning staying out of the clouds and needing a clear visibility so he could fly by sight and not trust the instruments. Roger checked the weather report multiple times this day. He first checked in about 7 hours before the flight and was told the cloud ceilings were 5,000 feet and visibility was 10 miles, which meant he can conduct the flight under visual flight rules. Between then and takeoff, including once while taxiing the aircraft, he checked in on the weather 4 more times. What they didn't tell Roger, and what investigators later pointed to as part of the cause of the crash, was that the U.S. Weather Bureau had issued a flash advisory for the area 20 minutes before Roger's last in-person briefing, which stated a band of snow 100 miles wide was headed towards them and would be blocking their route. This brought visibility down to 2 miles and had surface winds gusting as high as 51 miles per hour. With an overcast sky and snow falling, he had no clear visual to the horizon. The gusty winds and turbulence likely caused fluctuations in the instruments needed to maintain pitch and attitude, and would have been difficult for an inexperienced pilot to interpret. This would have left him to rely on the attitude gyro, which I read remains relatively stable under turbulent conditions. But this is where the most fatal part of the story comes into play. All of Peterson's training had come on aircrafts equipped with conventional artificial horizons. This aircraft was equipped with an outdated Sperry attitude gyro, which was the exact opposite of the ones he was used to, meaning he likely read it like he read the ones that he had learned on, which had sky up and ground down. The Sperry was inverted. This reverse setting could have caused reverse control action, which means it's likely he believed he was making a climbing turn when in reality he was descending. You can find other reasons out there that point to the cause of the crash if you wanted to, from foul play to questions about weight and balance distribution to Buddy himself took over the controls of the plane. Roger's parents never believed that it was pilot error. For me, though, I am interested in what we know versus speculation. However, if you wanted to, you could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. Here we are. This is it. In a field in Mason City, Iowa, where the lives of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and pilot Roger Peterson, 21, all came to an end. The posts are still there for that barbed wire fence that the plane came to rest against. Doesn't look like it's there anymore, though. That guitar plaque right there has the names of the 3 men. And then some 45s with each of their popular songs. Of course, glasses. And not to be forgotten, the pilot, Roger Peterson, February 3rd, 1959. The plane would have come from the southeast that way towards us, which is the northwest, coming to rest right there in front of the barbed wire fence. I'm going to line up a few of the crash photos. There is one that is more graphic than the rest of them, and I will be leaving that one out. This is about where that one photo I mentioned I won't be showing was taken from. In it, you can clearly see the bodies of Ritchie Valens, who would have been directly in front of us on that path, Buddy Holly, about 45 degrees to the right of Valens, and the Big Bopper came to rest behind them and over the then existing fence. Just beyond that pole is the approximate spot. Something I read that struck me was that all the men had cash on them ranging from $22 to $272, and the coroner took $11.65 from each man to pay his fees. Buddy's glasses were not mentioned in the autopsy report and were presumed lost until March of 1980, when they were discovered in the courthouse storage by a sheriff. They had been found in the spring of 1959 after the snow had melted, and had been given to the sheriff's office, placed into an envelope dated April 7th, 1959, along with the Big Bopper's watch, a lighter, 2 pairs of dice, and a part of another watch, and then had been misplaced when the county moved courthouses. The glasses were given to his wife a year later after a legal contest over them with his parents, and are now on display in the Buddy Holly Center in Lubbock. All right, that does it for today's video. Thank you so much for coming along with me to Clear Lake, Iowa to remember Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and pilot Roger Peterson. I know that this was a heavier one, but I don't want it to be all sad. I want this to serve as a remembrance to those men and all of the joy they brought millions of people all those many years ago, and continue to still do so today, as I am evidence of, standing out here in Iowa in the winter. All right, until that next video, I'm wishing you a super swell day, and I'll see you then. Bye.